It was just a wrong number at 3 a.m., or so she thought. But fate doesn't misdial. Elise didn't answer calls after midnight. Not anymore. Not since Liam left. Not since her life had become an endless loop of diapers, night shifts, and scraping pennies for formula. But that night, something made her reach for the vibrating phone on her chipped bedside table, half blind and still swaying in the fog of sleep. Hello? Her voice was rough, tired. There was a pause. Then a man's voice, low, urgent, shaken. She's gone. I don't know what to do. Elise blinked. I think you have the wrong number. No, wait, the man said, his voice fraying like a thread unraveling fast. Please, can you come? It should have been an immediate hang-up, but something in his voice, the grief, the crack in it, reached through the speaker like an invisible hand. She should have rolled over. She had a baby sleeping in the next room and a job to wake up for in 3 hours. But instead, she was sliding on jeans over her pajama pants, leaving a note beside the crib for her neighbor, who had agreed to watch Ava in emergencies. She didn't even know the address she was heading to until he texted it, and by then, she was already outside calling a rideshare with $23 in her account. The mansion sat on a hill just outside the city, all cold stone and gated silence. She stepped out of the car, heart pounding. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe he was dangerous. But when the door opened, she saw a man with tear-glossed eyes and an undone bow tie hanging limp around his neck. You came, he said. I think you called the wrong number. I think, he said softly. I didn't. Before she could answer, a nurse brushed past them, speaking quietly about a passing, his grandmother, the last thread of family he had left. Elise watched the man nod numbly, then turned to her with something vulnerable and raw behind his polished exterior. I just didn't want to be alone tonight, he admitted. She should have left. She had no place there, in that marble corridor with chandeliers and oil paintings worth more than her annual rent. But she didn't. Something about him, grief-stricken, clearly powerful, but so obviously lost, anchored her feet to the marble floor. They sat in silence for a while, on opposite ends of a velvet couch, the kind you'd never dare put your feet on. Eventually he said, I'm Nathaniel. Elise. He smiled, a tired, grateful sort of smile. You feel like the only thing real in this house right now. The clock ticked past 4 a.m. She should have been exhausted, but something had shifted, the kind of shift you only recognize in hindsight, the moment when one life quietly starts to turn into another. And, before the sun rose, he asked softly, will you stay? Sometimes closeness blooms not in grand gestures, but in the stillness where broken hearts begin to echo each other. Elise hadn't meant to stay longer than an hour, but 1 hour turned into breakfast. Toast neither of them ate, and that turned into a walk through the garden because Nathaniel said he couldn't bear to go back inside. And when Ava stirred in Elise's arms later that morning, blinking up at Nathaniel with curious baby eyes, he looked at the child like he'd never seen anything more grounding. You didn't tell me you had a daughter, he said softly. You didn't tell me you were an heir to an estate with hallways bigger than my whole apartment, she replied with a faint smile. They didn't say it then, but something delicate was forming. Not romance, not yet. Just a tether, a quiet thread of understanding neither of them dared pull too hard on. Over the next few days, Nathaniel kept finding excuses to invite her back. He said the house was too quiet, that the staff walked on eggshells, that he couldn't think straight unless someone real was nearby. And Elise, who was used to being overlooked and overwhelmed, found herself strangely seen. He asked her what she used to dream about before life got heavy. She asked him what it felt like to grow up with chandeliers and tutors, but no mother's hug. Somewhere between the 5th cup of tea and the second time she fell asleep on that velvet couch with Ava curled against her chest, Nathaniel stopped feeling like a stranger. She learned he had once wanted to be a writer, not a CEO. He learned she used to dance in a tiny studio over a laundromat before pregnancy left her body aching and priorities changed. They talked about everything but the most obvious thing. Why she was still there. Why he hadn't asked her to leave. Why she didn't want to. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled above the estate, Elise stood barefoot in the kitchen, Ava asleep in a sling against her chest, while Nathaniel chopped vegetables like it was second nature. "You cook?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "Granny insisted," he said, shrugging. "She said a man shouldn't be rich if he couldn't make his own soup." Elise laughed, an honest laugh that surprised them both, and Nathaniel paused, knife in hand, to look at her. Really look. She wasn't dressed up. No makeup. Her hair was tied with a baby sock because she couldn't find a band. But she glowed, not with glamour, but with life, with grit, with something the mansion had never held before. "You make this place feel like home," he said quietly. Elise didn't know what to say, so she just kept stirring the soup, pretending her heart hadn't skipped a beat. Because whatever this was, it was growing, carefully, unspoken, but real. Even in the warmth of something new, old truths wait like shadows, and some doors only open when you're ready to lose what's behind them. Elise never asked about the locked room. It was at the end of the East Wing corridor, a heavy, carved oak door with brass handles dulled by time. Every hallway had stories in Nathaniel's mansion, but that one seemed silenced, untouched. She wasn't snooping. She was chasing Ava, who had recently discovered the thrill of crawling at breakneck speed, squealing toward adventure. The baby stopped at the door and slapped her tiny hand against it, giggling. "Not that one," Nathaniel said from behind her, voice too even. Elise turned. "What's in there?" He hesitated. "Memories." That was all he said, and it was enough to chill the room more than the drafty windows ever had. Later that night, while Ava slept in the guest nursery and rain battered the windows again, Elise found Nathaniel in the study, his usual place when he didn't want to be found. He was staring at a photograph. She caught only a glimpse before he flipped it over. A woman, elegant and stern, standing in front of that very door. "My mother," he said without being asked. "She left when I was 13. That room was hers. I never opened it again." Elise sat beside him slowly, unsure if she was meant to listen or if he was just tired enough to finally speak. She wasn't cruel, just distant. Everything had to be perfect, polished, poised. I was a performance to her, a name to carry, not a person to love. He exhaled, eyes lost in the storm outside. When she left, she didn't even take a suitcase. Just walked out after a dinner party like she was heading upstairs. I waited all night. She never came back. Elise's fingers curled around the warm teacup in her lap. "You think if you open that room, it makes it real?" "I think if I open it," he said, "I'll have to stop pretending she might still come back." Elise felt the ache in his words, that ancient ache of abandonment that never quite stops pulsing, and she realized she wasn't the only one who'd been left behind in their life. "I know what it's like," she whispered. "My dad left before I could even form the sentence to ask why. I used to pretend every man who came to the door was him." Nathaniel looked at her, not with pity, with kinship. Two people scarred in different ways by the same wound. Absence. And still, even in the quiet, their shared silence said more than confessions could. That night, Nathaniel left the photo face down. But when he passed by that locked door later, he paused. His fingers hovered over the handle, and then fell away. Some truths he wasn't ready to open yet. But he wasn't alone in the hallway anymore. Love may bloom in stillness, but it's in the storm that we learn what can survive. Elise hadn't seen it coming. The shift. One moment she was setting Ava down for her afternoon nap. The next, Nathaniel was pacing the length of the drawing room like a man unraveling. His phone lay on the coffee table, screen glowing with a name she didn't recognize. Marjorie Alden, Legal Affairs. She stayed quiet, waited. He didn't look at her, didn't explain. Finally, she asked, "Is something wrong?" His jaw tightened. "My family's board wants to contest the will. My grandmother named me sole heir, but they're saying I'm compromised." "Compromised," Elise echoed, stepping closer. His voice was sharp when he answered. Not cruel, but clipped, defensive. "Because I've been distracted. Because I haven't moved forward with the estate's transition. Because I've been spending time with someone they call the house guest." She blinked. "That's what they call me?" He turned to her, guilt flickering behind his frustration. "I didn't say that. They did. But you didn't correct them either, she said softly. He rubbed his temples. Elise, this is my entire legacy. I have to think clearly. And there it was. Not her name, not her needs, just his legacy. Elise folded her arms, not in anger, but in defense of herself, her dignity. Do you think I'm some charity case, Nathaniel? That I latched on to you because you have warm beds and vintage wine? Number I never... Then why does it feel like I'm one crisis away from being asked to leave? Nathaniel looked stricken. Because I don't know how to do this. Because I'm trying to hold together a fortune and a future that everyone's trying to pull out from under me. And then you walked in, and everything stopped making sense. I didn't ask for any of this, she said, voice breaking. I answered a phone call at 3 a.m. I came because someone sounded like they needed someone, not because I wanted anything from you. Silence fell, heavier than all the marble and mahogany between them. Ava's soft cry drifted in from the other room. Elise turned to go. Wait, he said, reaching for her arm, but she pulled back. No, Nathaniel, I've lived too long with people who only want me when it's convenient. You don't get to do that to me, too. He watched her disappear down the hallway, the echo of her footsteps somehow louder than anything he'd ever heard. And for the first time in weeks, Nathaniel stood in that vast, beautiful home, completely alone. It's not always anger that drives people apart. Sometimes it's silence, heavy with the weight of unspoken fears. Elise didn't pack that night. She didn't storm out or slam doors. She just stayed in her room with Ava, watching her daughter sleep, trying to make sense of the ache in her chest. She'd told herself she wasn't getting attached, that the marble floors, the antique furniture, the soft-spoken man with grieving eyes, none of it was hers to keep. But now, she'd let herself imagine a different kind of life, one where she wasn't just surviving, she was safe, seen, loved maybe. And then it shattered with a single phrase, I have to think clearly. Down the hall, Nathaniel sat in his grandmother's music room, where the old grand piano collected dust and silence. His thoughts churned louder than the thunder outside. He hadn't meant to make her feel disposable, but that's what he'd done. He'd spent his life weighing decisions on ledgers and outcomes. He knew how to navigate wealth and strategy. But this unexpected, honest, complicated connection, he had no compass for it. I've lived too long with people who only want me when it's convenient. Her words haunted him. He didn't want her to go, and yet he hadn't asked her to stay. Not really. He heard Ava cry again, faintly, a small human sound in a house too used to silence, and he realized she wasn't the complication. She was the reminder of what mattered. But outside her door he hesitated. Elise, meanwhile, stared at the message draft on her phone. It was addressed to her friend Jada. Do you still have that spare room? Just for a few weeks. She didn't send it, because deep down, she didn't want to leave. And that scared her more than anything. She thought about all the nights she'd prayed for something better, for someone to care without conditions, for a safe place where Ava could grow up without the same cycles repeating. Was this it? Or had she already made the mistake of trusting too much, too soon? She wrapped herself in the threadbare sweater she always wore during long nights, the one from her last baby shower, the only thing that still smelled like the life she had before things got hard. Then a knock at the door. Software hesitant. She didn't answer. Nathaniel stood there, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched like a man who didn't know how to apologize, but wanted to learn. I'm sorry, he said through the door. I should have said it sooner. Inside, Elise pressed her forehead to the wood, eyes closed. But she didn't open it. Some wounds need more than words. Some forgiveness needs time. Sometimes healing doesn't come with grand gestures, just a hand reaching out, trembling, hoping it will be held. The morning air in the garden was crisp, laced with the scent of blooming lavender and wet earth. Elise sat on the bench near the old stone fountain, Ava gurgling in her lap, reaching toward the water like it held secrets only babies could understand. She hadn't seen Nathaniel all morning. Part of her had expected him to retreat, to leave things broken and unspoken like so many before him had. But part of her hoped. And then she heard it. Music. Not from a speaker, not from the dusty phonograph in the music room, but live, hesitant, imperfect, the kind of music made by someone who hadn't touched keys in a very long time. Elise stood, heart tugging, and followed the sound through the open French doors into the parlor. There, by the grand piano, sat Nathaniel, hair tousled, sleeves rolled, playing a lullaby. Ava's lullaby. Elise froze. Where did you learn that? He didn't stop playing. You hummed it. That night you fell asleep with her in the nursery. I remembered. Something twisted in her chest. Something warm. When the final note faded, he turned to her. I've been trying to fix things like a businessman, like this was some kind of negotiation. But it's not. His voice was steady now, but soft. It's you and her, and how I feel every time you walk into a room like you're bringing the light with you. Elise looked at him for a long moment, searching for the catch, the condition, the caveat. I don't want to be your escape from loneliness, she whispered. I want to be your choice. Nathaniel stood. You are. You always were. Ava squirmed, reaching out her arms, and Nathaniel stepped closer. Slowly, gently, Elise passed her daughter to him. It was the first time he held her without asking, and Ava smiled. That wide, gummy, trusting smile that children give only to those they sense are safe. She doesn't remember being hurt, Elise said, her voice trembling now. But I do, and I don't know how to forget. Nathaniel met her eyes. Then let me help you remember something better. It wasn't a promise of forever, not yet. It wasn't a kiss or a dramatic vow, but it was real. It was Nathaniel, holding her child with a reverence she hadn't known a man could feel. It was Elise, breathing just a little easier. It was the sound of the piano still echoing in the air like a heartbeat returning. Hope doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slips in through music and morning light. And this time, she let it in. Sometimes the quietest vows are the loudest declarations of the heart. The evening air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the faint flicker of candlelight. Elise stood on the terrace, cradling Ava in one arm, her other hand brushing against the smooth stone railing. The mansion behind her was no longer just a house. It was a tapestry of moments stitched together by trust, hope, and fragile beginnings. Nathaniel approached, his footsteps soft on the cobblestone. He stopped beside her, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tentative, like a promise waiting to be spoken aloud. I'm not good with words, he began, his voice steady but raw. But I want you to know, whatever happens, I want you here, with me. Not because it's expected, not because it's convenient, because I choose you, and Ava. Elise's eyes searched his, finding in them the same flicker of vulnerability she felt in herself. I've lived guarded, afraid of what I might lose. But with you, I'm learning that some risks are worth taking. She swallowed, the weight of the moment pressing gently but insistently. I don't have all the answers, she admitted, but I know I want to try. Nathaniel stepped closer, the space between them charged with unspoken hopes. Then let's try together, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Under the vast starlit sky, they sealed a promise, not with grand declarations, but with the quiet certainty that comes from choosing one another, imperfectly, completely. For Elise, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a commitment to trust, to hope, and to love again. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected moments, catching your heart by surprise. It started with a summer rain. Heavy droplets drummed against the windows, chasing the lingering heat from the day. Elise and Nathaniel were in the garden, watching Ava toddle between the blooming roses, her laughter a bubbling melody over the storm's rhythm. Suddenly, Ava tripped and fell into a puddle, splashing water everywhere. For a moment, silence. Then, without warning, Nathaniel burst out laughing, a deep, genuine laugh that echoed like sunshine through the clouds. Elise couldn't help but join in, her worries melting away in the shared joy of the moment. Nathaniel held out his hand. Dance with me. She hesitated, but the rain wasn't waiting, and neither was Ava, who clapped her hands with delight. Together they twirled and slipped, soaked to the bone but light as air, spinning under the silver sky. In that laughter and rain-soaked embrace, All the fears and doubts seemed to wash away. The mansion wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home where joy found its way back in, unbidden and bright. And for the first time in a long while, Elise felt free. Free to love, to hope, and to be happy. True love is not just in the moments of joy, but in how it weathers the storms. Months had passed since the rain-soaked dance in the garden, and the seasons had shifted, painting the estate in golden hues and brittle winds. Elise and Nathaniel's lives had settled into a delicate rhythm, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Business pressures mounted. The family board's resistance grew louder, their doubts about Nathaniel's leadership fueled by whispers and old resentments. Elise felt the cold brush of judgment, not only from the board but from society's unspoken expectations. One evening, after a particularly grueling meeting, Nathaniel returned home exhausted and withdrawn. Elise reached out, but he pulled away, the weight of his responsibilities closing him off. "Don't you understand?" he snapped, voice strained. "If I fail, everything we've built, everything I've fought for, will crumble. I can't afford distractions." Her heart fractured. "I'm not a distraction." "But sometimes it feels that way," he confessed, eyes filled with anguish. They stood on opposite sides of a chasm neither knew how to bridge. For days, silence reigned, broken only by Ava's innocent laughter and the ticking of the grand clock in the hallway. Elise questioned whether love was enough to survive the storms that life and family had brought. Yet in the quiet, both wrestled with the choice to fight for what they had or surrender to the pressures that threatened to pull them apart. From the ashes of old wounds, new life can bloom, if only we dare to step into the unknown. The first light of dawn spilled softly through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. Elise sat by the window, her fingers tracing the delicate lines of Ava's drawing, crayon colors bright and hopeful. Outside, the garden was waking up, petals glistening with dew, the scent of jasmine mingling with fresh earth. It was a quiet world, one that promised renewal. Nathaniel entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to Elise, their fingers brushing lightly, a small touch but full of meaning. "I met with the board today," he began, his voice calm but resolute. "I laid everything on the table, told them that I'm not just fighting for the estate, but for the family I want to build." Elise smiled softly. "And how did they respond?" "Better than I expected. It's going to be a long road, but they're willing to listen." She reached out and took his hand. "We'll walk that road together." The months ahead were filled with new routines. Shared breakfasts where laughter returned, late nights planning Ava's future, and quiet moments where vulnerability was met with understanding. Elise found herself exploring parts of the mansion she had never seen, each room a canvas for fresh memories. She painted Ava's nursery in soft pastels, adding handmade decorations that whispered of hope. Nathaniel, too, seemed transformed, not just in his confidence with the board, but in the way he looked at Elise and Ava, as if seeing them anew each day. One afternoon, while watching Ava chase butterflies in the garden, Elise realized that despite the uncertainties, this life they were building was real. New beginnings don't erase the past, but they give it meaning. They give hope a chance to grow, like the first fragile shoots of spring after a long winter. And in that light, Elise felt ready to believe in tomorrow. Love asks for the hardest choices, when holding on means letting go. The hospital room smelled sterile and cold, a sharp contrast to the warmth Elise had come to find in the walls of the mansion. Ava lay asleep in her crib, fragile and peaceful despite the wires and monitors attached to her tiny body. Nathaniel sat beside Elise, his hand enveloping hers with a strength born of desperation. The doctors had been clear. Ava needed a costly experimental treatment. Without it, her chances were slim. But the price was staggering, beyond even Nathaniel's vast fortune. They sat in silence, the weight of impossible decisions pressing down on them. "Sell the estate," Nathaniel finally whispered, voice breaking. "It's the only way." Elise's heart clenched. The mansion, their new beginning, their sanctuary, was slipping away. But Ava's life was everything. "No," she said firmly, tears glistening in her eyes. "We'll find another way." Nathaniel shook his head. "This isn't about pride, it's about love." For days they searched for options, charities, loans, every possible avenue. But time was running out. One night, Elise woke to find Nathaniel packing a small bag. "I'm going to speak with some old contacts. Maybe I can arrange private funding," he said, "but it might take time." She looked at him, exhausted and raw. "We don't have time." He reached for her, voice steady but fragile. "If it means saving Ava, I'll give up everything. The estate, my future, even us." The words hung between them like a shadow. Elise stepped closer, placing a hand over his heart. "We're in this together, whatever happens." And then, in the quiet hum of the night, they made the ultimate promise, to sacrifice whatever was needed for the love that bound them. When every note finds its place, the melody of life comes alive. Imperfect, beautiful, whole. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of the refurbished music room, where the old grand piano stood proudly, polished to a gentle shine. Elise sat beside Nathaniel, their hands intertwined, as Ava toddled nearby, chasing the soft dance of dust motes in the air. The past months had tested them in ways they never imagined. Sacrifices made, fears faced, and love deepened beyond words. The estate was no longer just a symbol of wealth, but a home shaped by resilience and hope. Nathaniel began to play, fingers gliding over the keys with newfound confidence. The melody was simple, yet filled with layers of emotion, a reflection of their journey. Elise smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder, feeling the harmony not just in music, but in the life they were creating together. Ava giggled, clapping her hands, her laughter weaving through the notes like a promise. They had weathered storms, faced hard truths, and made sacrifices. But in the end, love had written the final harmony. Imperfect, enduring, and beautiful. As the last note lingered in the air, Elise whispered, "This is home." Nathaniel kissed her forehead gently. "Always." Together they looked toward the future, a new symphony yet to be composed, full of hope, courage, and endless possibilities.